All right. Okay, we're gonna do all this. We're gonna test and action. Hi there, everyone. It's me, As One Plays Everything. Welcome back to Chasing Thoughts with Chase, episode 2. Surprise! I'm back for another episode. It's not a one-time gig thing. Yay! I call that improvement over the last 2 attempts of my podcast where I didn't get past the first episode. So, if you're wondering, where's your bandana? Last time you said the bandana was going to be your signature look. The bandana's in the washing machine, right? While that's getting washed with all the rest of my colors, I decided I should record this episode at 9 o'clock in the night. It's like 9 what? It's nearly 9, it's nearly 9:30 right now on Wednesday. I'm supposed to release this episode on Friday, which means I need to be done with the editing process on Thursday. And for context, for those of you who don't know, the only time I have ever completed a video in one day was my April Fool's video that was like 2 minutes long. So that'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun to do that. Actually, with that specific video, I completed the process in under 24 hours. The whole process, recording, editing, everything. But that's not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is nuclear fusion. This was a topic I selected to talk about because I like it. I'm quite knowledgeable in it, and nuclear fusion holds a lot of promise for the future and its future applications. And there's also like a lot of interesting lore behind it. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The distinction needs to be made is that there's 2 different kinds of nuclear power. A lot of people don't know that there's 2 different kinds of nuclear power. This might come as a shock to some of you. But yes, there's 2 different kinds of nuclear power. The first nuclear kind of power, the one that we all associate it with, and how all nuclear power is done today, is done through a process called nuclear fission. So nuclear fission is where you got a heavy atom, and then you have another heavy atom, and you just go, boom, and then a heavy atom splits in that one of those heavy atoms splits into 2 more lighter atoms. So now you have 3 atoms, and then it creates a chemical reaction which creates a large amount of heat, and then we can convert that heat into electrical energy because we're really good at doing that. Now, obviously, as most of you who know the process of nuclear fission know and just know about nuclear power in general, nuclear fission leaves behind high-level radioactive waste is technically the term for it, but radioactive waste. We have to deal with that radioactive waste in some way. We have to find a way to storage it and also make sure that no one accidentally opens it up, which that by itself could be a whole different topic about how language changes over time. I might make another episode on that in the future. You can comment down below if you want to see something like that. How does nuclear fusion differ from nuclear fission? So nuclear fission is where you got a tiny atom, most likely a hydrogen atom, and then another tiny hydrogen atom, and then those 2 hydrogen atoms combine together, and then they make a helium atom, and then that process makes heat that we can then convert into electrical energy. Now, the immediate pro of nuclear fusion, I'll say this right off the bat, is that nuclear fusion doesn't create radioactive waste. However, it does require more heat and pressure to create and maintain the process as opposed to just having regular nuclear fission. I just wanted to go into real quick like the most popular kinds of fuel for both nuclear fission and nuclear fusion, because I did research on this and I want to share this with you. And it's relevant to the topic, so you get to hear about it. So, nuclear fission uses 2 major elements. It uses uranium and plutonium. Specifically, if we're talking about uranium, that one's used more often, and there's actually a very specific sub-element of uranium they use. It's called uranium-235. The reason they use uranium-235 over basically everything else in nuclear fission generators is because the atoms break apart really easily, so it's easy to start and control the process using this. Now, obviously, these are not the only two heavy metals that you can use. You can also use thorium is another one. Neptunium, that's another one I know that you can use for nuclear fission. But they're all radioactive, but they all share the trait of they're all radioactive and they're all really heavy elements, which generally means that they're somewhat difficult to obtain. Specifically, uranium-235 is actually fairly rare, despite how common just uranium in general is in our surface. That specific subtype that's very popular for nuclear fission is actually quite rare. So, yeah, we could be running into a potential crisis within the next 50 years or so, where we're running out of uranium-235, so we have to look into alternate methods of. So, nuclear fusion uses deuterium and tritium. Now, those sound like fancy named elements, deuterium and tritium. I'm pretty sure I'm butchering the pronunciation. These are both essentially different isotopes of hydrogen. And as I said before, those two elements will combine together to create helium. So the immediate pros of nuclear fusion over nuclear fission, I've already said one of them, is that the energy is clean. We don't have any high-level radioactive waste we need to deal with. But also, the process creates a lot of energy. And for context, for how much energy is possible to be created by nuclear fusion, consider this little fact. Our sun, the thing that gives us life, light, yellowish sun, that in 1 second creates enough energy to power our entire civilization for a whole millennium. In a single second. The sun uses nuclear fusion to create all of its power. So, I am not kidding when I say this. If we could master nuclear fusion, we'd literally be harnessing the power of the stars. Whereas now, with solar energy, we're only able to get the byproducts of it. And this leads to a very interesting problem that nuclear fusion specifically could solve. And that is the global energy crisis, specifically with, like, China and a few other countries, where they don't have nearly enough energy to meet the demands of that energy, so they have to limit their energy access to their citizens, which causes a lot of potential political problems, specifically of China, where they try to seek to take as much land as possible to make things like, I think there's a dam that they constructed that it's able to provide about 10% of the power that they currently use. But, like in Africa or something. I don't know. It's somewhere not in China. For your sake and for me remaining a well-informed person, I will look it up and I will make a short out of it. If we could master a nuclear fusion and make that a widespread thing that we could use, it could literally solve the global energy crisis and jump us leagues ahead in technology because of the sheer amount of possibilities that are opened up now that we've mastered nuclear fusion. Now, obviously, all I've said about nuclear fusion is, wow, it's such a great alternative to nuclear fission. Why don't we just replace all of our nuclear generators with nuclear fusion generators? There are a few problems with this. The first problem is I mentioned that it requires more heat and pressure to maintain the process. And the thing is, we've already figured out how to start the process, and I'll touch on that in a bit. We've already figured out how to start the process of nuclear fusion. We don't know how to keep reactors cool enough to sustain it for long periods of time. And also sustain it in a way where we could get more energy out of the process than we put into it. That's the real problem. Is to find a way to make this process energy efficient like we can with nuclear fission. But if we can do that, the possibilities are ridiculous. And one of these things that, hypotheticals that if we manage to master it could become possible is nuclear fusion engines. I read about this somewhere in the fact book I read. But basically, if we were able to make nuclear fusion jet engines for spaceships, we could propel ourselves as fast as 20% the speed of light, which is ridiculously fast. No, really, it's crazy fast. So the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. You'd be able to make it to the moon in a second and a half traveling at the speed of light. So going at 20%, that would be way faster than anything we're capable of today. But of course, I rambled about all this, and I want to keep it as coherent as me as a person possibly can. So I mentioned before where I said we already know how to start the process and that I would touch upon this later. This is the time when I'm going to touch upon it. Before we used nuclear fission as like a power source, we used it as a weapon of destruction. We see the biggest example of this, and the most famous example definitely, is when the US dropped the nukes on Japan back in 1945 to end the war. Those use nuclear fission. Nuclear fusion bombs exist. They're called thermonuclear bombs, technically. There are a few stark contrasts to regular nukes and thermonuclear bombs, and these differences mostly stem from the fact that they use different processes to achieve their explosions. Nuclear fission bombs, like the ones dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, those ones are going to explode using nuclear fission, and they're going to leave behind a lot of nasty radiation. But their explosive power is relatively tame-ish. Like, it'll level a city, but not much more than that. The real problem from those kind of nuclear bombs is the long-term radiation, which is going to stay for like literal centuries because uranium takes forever to break down. But thermonuclear bombs use nuclear fusion. They forego the whole radioactive fallout thing to just causing a lot more destruction. And for context of how much destruction these bombs are capable of causing, whenever you measure a thermonuclear bomb, you use how much destruction it's capable of, you use a unit called a megaton. A megaton of explosive power is equivalent to 1,000,000 tons of standard TNT explosive power. The most powerful bomb ever to be detonated, Tsar Bomba, you might have heard about this, but Tsar Bomba was a thermonuclear bomb. And because of that, and along with a couple other things that the Russians did, it's actually one of the cleanest nuclear bombs ever tested. The real reason, in my opinion, why nukes are so scary, and I might get into this in another episode, obviously, is the largest atomic bomb ever detonated had 5,600 megatons of explosive destruction. And remember, 1 megaton is equivalent to 1,000,000 tons of TNT worth of destruction. So these bombs are absolutely crazy on a whole different level when it comes to the destruction we're capable of creating with these bombs. That bomb was detonated all the way back in 1961. Imagine how scary, like, I don't want to fearmonger here because that's not the point of this channel, but consider for a second how much scarier we would be capable of today and how devastating thermonuclear bombs in the modern day using modern day technology would be. I don't want to imagine it, and I don't really think you want to imagine it either. So let's move on from that topic. Now, I will probably just flat out say this. We are probably not getting nuclear fusion anytime within the next 50 years. So another way of approaching the problem of limited power resources as well as just an increasing power demand is how do we optimize the current process that we have, nuclear fission? How can we optimize that to be the best it can be? Some solutions that have potentially been presented for making it more efficient is using a specific element called thorium instead of uranium. The reason you want to use thorium instead of uranium, even though it's harder to break down, and start the reaction chain, is that thorium has a less imposing half-life than uranium, so the radioactive material won't be a threat for as long. as I stated before, there are other elements that you can use in power plants, such as neptunium, and then also the second most common used element, which is plutonium. And it's important that we search for these alternatives because we're kind of running out of uranium-235, which, as I said, is the most popular nuclear fission generator fuel, nuclear power fuel right now. I don't really know what else to say. Oh, wait, I do have a random fact about tritium that I have in my notes here. So, as I said already, it's a radioactive isotope of hydrogen that's used in the nuclear fusion process. Like, this would be the go-to source material for starting up, a go-to material for starting the nuclear fusion process up once we got generators up and going. It's not super abundant, but there is a process to manufacture this element. So tritium, and this is, I'm gonna say word for word from my thing so that I don't like misrepresent it. So tritium is most often produced in nuclear reactors by neutron activation of lithium-6. The release and diffusion of tritium and helium produced by the fission of lithium can take place within ceramics known as breeder ceramics. That was all I copy and pasted from the explanation. I don't actually understand how the process of producing tritium works, other than the basic of it can be made, even though it's not particularly abundant. And yeah, that's it. I don't really plan on making particularly long episodes. Like, the first episode was a particularly unique instance because I had like 21 questions I needed to answer, and this one I just needed to talk for a few minutes about a subject I really liked. So I guess I'll give you a sneak peek for my plans in the future, and the plan is next week I'm going to talk about the Olympics, where I'm gonna reveal something I've been cooking up for the past few weeks, and something I will be implementing into my personal life next week. So stay tuned for that. That will be coming out next Friday. That's it, really. I don't really have anything else. I would say like and subscribe, but that's so cliche. I don't really want to say it, but it boosts the analytics, so please do it if you do enjoy this content. And I'll see you next time.